There were a lot of inconsistencies on the football field for the Ball State Cardinals last year, and it led them just to not have a very successful 2023 campaign. And while things are looking up for this program here in 2024, head coach Mike New might very well be coaching for his job this season. However, with some good returning talent and a fair amount of pieces coming in through the portal sprinkled in throughout this roster, can the Ball State Cardinals turn it around and get into a postseason bowl game here in 2024? You're about to find out what I think here in this video. What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel, guys. If you don't know by now, well, I'm predicting all 134 teams this summer. We're so close to being done with prediction season, and college football happens just later this month. It's a very exciting time on my channel right now. But please, guys, if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am and you want to hear what I have to say during the season, well, you better make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss an upload either for the rest of prediction season, leading into the regular season, or during the season, during the college football playoff. You guys are going to want to stick around on my channel and listen to everything that I have to say. But there are more ways you can help support the channel, and you're doing one of them right now by simply watching the video, which I want to thank you a lot for, because it does help support my channel in more ways than you can even imagine. But you can also like, comment, share, and anything else you do to interact with the channel help support what I do here on YouTube. Nate, you wear glasses? Yes, I do. My contact's been bothering me, so I had to take them out. But hey, you guys don't really care about that, do you? Let's dive on into talking about the Ball State Cardinals here in 2024. Well, how do we do that on my channel this season? Well, I'm glad you asked. We'll take a deep dive into the team's offense, into the defense, and at the end of the video, we'll go through the Ball State football schedule, give it a good old game-by-game preview and prediction. Let's jump into it. Do want to tell you guys a couple more things, though, because we're right over here will be the stats the team put up either offensively or defensively last season. And, of course, for your viewing pleasure, right down there below the team's logo, I have put the team's coaching staff. Mike New, again, could very well be coaching for his job this year. Let's take a look at the Ball State offense here in 2024. And, guys, I mean, just when you go back and take a look here at this offense, it just overall was not very good last season. I mean, you take a look at that bar right up there that I just pointed out earlier, and it's obvious that, while, look, the run game held up its end of the bargain. It had 171 rushing yards per game. Granted, they ran the ball almost 200 more times than they threw the ball last season, but still, 171 rush yards per game, that's a very good number. This might have been the worst passing offense not named Army, Navy, or Air Force in the country last season. Only 136 passing yards per game, and you didn't even have a quarterback break 600 passing yards last season. Lane Hatcher, who originally was recruited by Nick Saban, that's kind of his claim to fame at this point, because he just didn't have that great of a college career based on what his expectations were. Started out really well last season, was the leading passer for Ball State last year, but he threw 98 passes, 582 yards, 4 touchdowns and 1 pick, and while that stat line is solid enough, you wanted to see some better things out of Lane Hatcher. He has run out of college eligibility, and he has graduated. Again, kind of just didn't really fill his full potential, at least I feel like, and he will no longer be in the college football landscape and no longer here for the Ball State Cardinals. You do, however, return a guy that I think is going to end up being your starter this year. That is Caden Samanza. Now, was the third leading passer among the 3 quarterbacks that threw passes last year, but you could argue in a lot of ways he was the most impressive. 480 yards, 3 touchdowns, but did throw 5 interceptions, so you're going to be looking for him to really turn things around there in that department. You want that touchdown interception ratio to get a lot better, and you figure that it will with a full season of starting football under his belt. He's got some pretty good intangibles, has got a pretty darn good skill set, so we'll see what Caden Zamans is going to be able to bring to this offense. However, if he does not get the start, you could see a guy by the name of Chase Harrison end up getting the start here for this team. He is a Marshall transfer, and he definitely very well could end up being the starting quarterback for this team, and it wouldn't shock me one bit. Now, there is another guy that I do have to talk about. You don't see his name on the board, and that's because he is not listed as a quarterback. In fact, you won't even see him on the defensive side, even though on the official Ball State website, you do see him listed as a defensive back. He did play a lot of quarterback for the team last season, and that is Kyle Kelly. Hopefully I'm saying that name right, but last season, he was the team's 2nd overall leading passer. Find the stats for you right here. 577 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, but did have the lowest completion percentage out of the 3. Now, at least according to what the Ball State roster says, he probably is going to end up helping out that defensive back room this season. However, he also was the team's 2nd leading rusher last year. 724 yards and 7 touchdowns for him. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of role he plays on the offense, if any, for the Cardinals here in 2024. We got to run through the skill position rooms really quickly because I had to tell you about Kyle Kelly. Okay, Marquez Cooper and Rico Barfield, two running backs last season. Marquez Cooper, of which broke 1,000 yards, 1,043 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was a former Kent State transfer. Now he's going over to join his old head coach Sean Lewis over there with the San Diego State Aztecs. And again, Rico Barfield, close to 100 yards last year, no longer in the room. Both of them gone to the portal. So you're going to get Vaughn Pemberton, Charlie Spegall, TJ Horton, and Christian Davis back to this running back room, as well as Braden Sloan, who is a transfer that comes in here to this room. He's over from Eastern Kentucky and could provide some pretty solid production out of this running back room. And even though you lose Marquez Cooper, it could still be a pretty good rushing attack this season. You take a look at the wide receiver and tight end room. Well, you only lose two notable pieces, at least that I could find. Ahmad Edwards is gone due to graduation for the Cardinals last season. He was the team's second leading receiver, really close to that top receiver, 354 yards and 1 touchdown on 34 catches. You also do lose Brady Hunt out of the tight end room. And even though he did not have a catch last season, still a fairly notable loss to me because he does leave as a transfer going over to South Carolina. It's also worth mentioning that when you talk about Brady Hunt, while he didn't have a catch last season, he was the team's second leading receiver in 2022. That is why he is a notable loss to me. So, okay, who do you get back catching passes for you here in 2024? Well, Keon Magwood, and hopefully I'm saying that first name right, he will be coming back as the team's leading receiver. Was only 4 yards ahead of Ahmad Edwards, but I mean, hey, you get your lead receiver back technically. He did lead the team in catches, though, with 41 catches, 358 yards, and had a touchdown last season. Ty Robinson, Nick Presley, and Malcolm Gilly, some other names you'll see in the wide receiver room this year, as well as a transfer coming in through the portal. It is Justin Bowick, who's over from the Eastern Illinois Panthers. And in the tight end room, you do get your leading receiver among tight ends back last season, and that was a guy by the name of Tanner Kozoil. And again, hopefully saying that name right, 295 yards, and led the team with 3 receiving touchdowns last season. The team that only threw 9 passing touchdowns last year, guys. But you get him back. Christian Abney and Maximus Webster also come back. And now it's time to talk about the offensive line. The offensive line was a huge part in helping the run game be as successful as it was. And even though they didn't throw the football a lot, they only allowed 26 sacks last year, which I know is not a fantastic number, but it's not a bad number by any means either. You do lose Tommy Lorinks, hopefully again saying that name right, who's gone due to graduation, and Corey Stewart has entered the transfer portal. So here's what your offensive line in the room looks like in 2024. Ethan Crow, Teron Tayo, Cole Mosier, John Mucciolo, again, hopefully I'm saying names right. I apologize for any mispronunciations, by the way. Damon Kaler and Kevin Meter all return to the offensive line room, while you get a couple transfers in here. Yes, Yasser Al-Awadi is a projected starter on the offensive line, and Luke Dalton comes in through the transfer portal as well. So overall, guys, when you talk about this offense here in 2024, I mean, you have to start out with this pass game. It has to be better. You have to get consistency out of the quarterback play. And while, look, you get Pemberton back, and again, who knows what role Kelly's going to end up playing on the offense, if any at all, as again, according to the Ball State roster, he's projected to help out that defensive back room this season, but is on the roster, will be playing football for Ball State in some capacity. We'll see if he gets in the offensive game at all. I mean, he was a very good rusher for the team last season. Again, led the team in rushing touchdowns, did Kyle Kelly last year. That's the big piece that I don't really know where to factor him in with Ball State, which makes him a little tricky to figure out, but it's not tricky to know that this pass game needs to improve in order for Ball State to have a successful 2024. You go ahead and take a look at the Ball State defense, and I mean, overall, there were some really good things out of this defense last year, and statistically, you take a look, it was one of the better defenses in the conference last year. In fact, it was a phenomenal rushing defense, which is why this defense was so good. It was the inconsistency at the quarterback position that kind of held this team back, and while that very well could be the case again this year, you'll have to find out if that is the case when we go through my schedule prediction. I mean, this defense, it's going to be hard to replicate what it did last year just because those are some really good numbers that it put up. And it also loses a lot of talent, and I mean a ton of talent off of this defensive line. We're not going to go through a whole bunch of stats here, but I will go stats through one guy who probably was the most impactful defensive lineman on the team last season. At least you could argue that. Tavion Woodard is gone. He had 16 tackles and 2 sacks last season. Just a very good defensive lineman, even though the stat sheet is not going to blow you away. You take a look at him on film, you take a look at him playing, and Tavion Woodard is a very, very good football player that leads through the transfer portal. But alas, there are some guys that had more impressive stat lines than him. Again, that's why I said you could argue Tavion Woodard was the best defensive line I don't think I said best. I said most impactful. I meant to say best. It definitely is not arguable that some of these guys that I'm about to list off here were more impactful than Woodard, at least statistically, last season. Makari Siblis is going to be gone. 36 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and was the leading tackler among defensive linemen last season. Jack Sape, however you say that last name, had 2.5 sacks last year. And then you just lose a ton of other production. James Maxson, Kyron Mims, Kyle King, John Harris. And I think there are even one or two others there that I just couldn't include on this list because they did lose so much out of the defensive line room. So you are getting a lot of guys in here through the transfer portal. Justin Thomas is in, Riley Tolsma is in, as well as Lasier Luter, however you pronounce that name. I think there even may be misspelling there. Surprise, surprise. What do you know? It is not. But those three guys will be entering the defensive line room this year to couple with returners like Brandon Berger, Drew Hughes, Nathan Reichert, and Cody Smith. That's your defensive line room here in 2024. A lot of guys that were in some depth roles last year got to play some big roles, and it'll be interesting to see how the transfers fit in because they did bring in a ton of transfers here through the portal there in the defensive line room. You did lose a couple of really, really good linebackers from last season, as both Cole Pierce and Sidney Houston Jr. are gone off of this defense. We'll run through some stats for him here. Cole Pierce, second leading tackler on the team last season. 78 tackles, had 3 sacks. You throw in a pick there as well. Just a really, really good player. And then losing Sidney Houston, led the team with 8 sacks last season, was also a top 5 tackler, had 59 tackles. No longer will you see him playing for the Cardinals. Both of those guys have graduated. So, okay, what does your linebacker room look like now? Well, Kalante Newson is coming back, as well as Joey Stemler, Jackson Weagold, and Jack Beebe will all be coming back to the linebacker room, as well as you get a fairly, what I think is going to be a fairly impactful transfer for this defense coming over from Syracuse, and Khalib Gilmore. Unknown to me as of right now what kind of role he's going to play, but it could potentially be a pretty sizable one, and he'll help out this defense through the portal. But getting Kalante Newson back is huge because he was the team's leading tackler last season. 80 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 2 pass defended. Anytime you get your lead tackler back, that's a big win for the defense. Defensive back room, let's talk about it really quickly. Damian Charity and Tyler Potts, two very, very, very impactful corners for this team last year. Potts was second on the team in passes defended, and Charity had himself a pretty good season last year as well. 30 tackles, 2 pass defended. Both of those guys have graduated. You do lose a very talented safety to the NFL. Lauren Strickland had 31 tackles, a sack, and 2 pass defended. You lose your leader in pass defended, as well as your third leading tackler to the portal, and Jordan Riley. And Algerique Mowry is gone due to graduation. So your defensive back room will look like this. Thylan Baldwin, Jamad Harmon, and Blair Sconehorst will all be cornerbacks for this team this year, as well as Miles Norwood, who is coming over from the transfer portal. He is coming over from that of New Mexico State with a huge amount of players that leaves over there. You do get a transfer in the safety room as well. It is George Udo, who comes over from a Power 4 program in Cincinnati, and he'll join returners like Jordan Coleman, Dee Snyder, and A.J. Taylor. And then the special teams room, well, Lucas Barrow is gone out of the punting room due to the transfer portal, so you do lose him, but you do return Brian Cooey Jr., as well as Jackson Corville to be that punter, or I should say to be that place kicker here. Brian Cooey Jr. obviously going to be the punting, and Jackson Corville will handle the kicking this year for the Cardinals. Again, I'll say it. I said it once, I'll say it again. I just think it's going to be hard to replicate what this defense did last year because it lost so much, especially off that defensive front last year. And anytime you lose an NFL caliber player like Lauren Strickland, especially to a smaller school like Ball State, it's going to be a very, very big impact here on this defense. So I see the defense taking a step back, but overall, I think they did fairly well with the very small pieces they did bring in through the portal, but it'll be interesting to see how that defensive line gels this year because that is the key, right? The secondary might very well stay the same, if not take a little bit of a step back, but that defensive front, if it posts anywhere close to the number it did last year, this should still be a solid defense for the Cardinals this upcoming season. But now we take a look at the Ball State football schedule, and I got to say something before we do. You'll notice, and no, it is not a misprint. Ball State actually does have one of their 2 bye weeks this season in week 1. I know it was probably going to plague somebody this year, and it's unfortunate that it's a team like the Ball State Cardinals. So their season actually begins a week later than everyone else in week 2. No, that is not a misprint. That is actually how their schedule sets up. You can go fact check me on any website. FB schedules, the Ball State website, whatever have you. So Ball State really only technically gets one bye week this year, but they do get kind of an extra week of fall camp, if that sort of makes any sense. So let's dive on into the schedule here. I think they're going to be winning their first game against the Missouri State Grizzlies. Oh, I have to tell you how we do everything around here. Well, any game at home, like that first game against Missouri State, that's underlined. Again, that's a home game. Any game on the road is in italics or that slanted text. Any game you see in green is a game that I think the Cardinals are going to win easily. Spoiler alert, there are none, but if it was going to be one, probably would end up being that Missouri State game there in week 2. I just think the Grizzlies going to be a pretty solid FCS team. Or no, Bears. Bears? Grizzlies. I'll fact check that. I knew running through into my head I had something wrong. It is the Missouri State Bears. I know a Grizzly's a bear. I should get partial credit for that. Not really. Okay, so they should be able to beat the Missouri State Bears because any game in yellow is going to be a close competitive game. But when I still see the Cardinals being able to win in any game in red, of course, is a loss like this one will be on the road against the Miami Hurricanes. Cam Ward is coming in. Damian Martinez is coming in. Xavier Restrepo is coming back. Loaded up on defensive line talent. And just overall, just going to be a very talented team at Miami this season. They're going to explode. I think they're going to have a pretty good season. Ball State will be no match for the Hurricanes. They're on the road in week 3, even though, again, second game of the year. If you want that explanation, I just said it earlier. Go rewind a little bit. On the road against Central Michigan. Could be a very winnable game here. Central Michigan is trying to fill in some gaps, but Burt Emanuel is coming back at quarterback. Now, while he wasn't the primary starter last year because Jace Bauer has gone over to Sam Houston to be the quarterback for the Bearcats. I still like Central Michigan this year. Some pretty good offensive and defensive talent coming back, and I think they're going to be able to beat the Ball State Cardinals. You look at this road game here against James Madison, and one that, look, even though Jordan McLeod is gone and a ton of other leading talent, both offensively and defensively for the Dukes leave from last season, along with their head coach Kurt Signetti, who is now going to go over and be the head coach with the Indiana Hoosiers. Bob Chesney is coming in there. He was at Holy Cross last year, led that team to be one of the best teams in the FCS ranks last season. And I think he's one of the bright young head coaches that we have in our game right now. And I think he's going to end up performing really well. And because of that, I think James Madison ends up performing really well. And I do think the Dukes are going to be able to be a really good team this year. And it'll lead them to a win against the Ball State Cardinals. However, Ball State, I think, is going to get win number 2 here against the Western Michigan Broncos. Now, Western Michigan, interesting team this year. This is the team that I think is going to see their good moments and their bad moments. They do return Hayden Wolf at quarterback, and if he can up his level of play from where he was last season and get kind of the Hayden Wolf back that we saw in flashes at Old Dominion, Western Michigan should see an improved offense this year. They got some really good wide receiver talent coming back. The defense is loaded with experience this season, but Ball State, I think, is going to be competitive to pull out a couple of wins. I see the quarterback play improving for Ball State this year. By how much? Again, we'll have to wait and see, but it's going to get better from where it was last season. You still have some really solid weapons here, especially some coming in through the transfer portal. And defensively, I think overall that secondary should be pretty solid. In the defensive front, I don't see taking back as big of a step as I may have foreshadowed there in the past. Yes, I see them taking a step back, but overall, I still think Ball State's going to be one of those teams that's going to end up being pretty competitive. And if their offense can put it together, they're going to be able to win some games. And I think this one against Western Michigan is going to be one of them. However, I do not think this game against Kent State is. And even though I don't necessarily love Kenny Burns here, there are usually 1 or 2 teams out of the MAC that do a lot better than expected and a couple teams that do a lot lower than expected. Well, Kent State is just one of those teams that I have being a little bit of a surprise this season. Now, while they probably aren't going to make a bowl game or do anything crazy like that, they do have some really solid players. Tommy Ulatowski is going to be taking over quarterback there. You have Krishan McCray at wide receiver, Gavin Garcia at running back. Some pretty solid defensive players return to that roster as well. Some notable guys in through the portal. And I think Kent State going to be sneaky competitive this year. So that's a loss for me for Ball State. And then you do have to play another Power 5 team in the Vanderbilt Commodores. And look, it's Vanderbilt. We know not a very good team in terms of what you're talking about in the SEC, but they still got SEC talent. They got Power 4 talent, and they got a lot of solid pieces that I think are just better than what Ball State has, even though they lost a lot through the portal. That's a win for the Commodores, and you can only afford one more loss here if you are the Ball State Cardinals and still trying to look to break into that postseason. And I got news for you. Things do not get easier from here. Although I do think that you're going to be able to be competitive in a couple of these games you have coming up, I do not think that they will be beating the Northern Illinois Huskies. Northern Illinois, just one of those teams this year that I think is going to sit towards the top of the Mid-American Conference. And look, while I know Thomas Hammock has had some trouble finding consistency, it's been up and down with that program. Last year was a little bit of an up. They made a bowl game, and I think they continue to go up here. Got a lot of good returning talent offensively, defensively, especially in that wide receiver room. Quarterback play should be solid for him, and I think Northern Illinois could contend for a MAC title this season. But you're playing the best team in the MAC in your first MACtion game after your first and really technically only bye week, because your first bye week becomes before your season has even started here. You're just not going to be able to beat the Miami Redhawks. You got Brett Gabbert coming back, the best linebacking duo in the country. Both of them broke triple digits last year. Talent all over the field. They won the conference last year. They're the favorites to do it again this season, and I like them a lot. I like them to win this game here, but I think Ball State's going to be able to pick up some wins here towards the end of the season. I think they get a road win against Buffalo, because even though I don't necessarily love this Ball State roster, I don't necessarily love this Buffalo roster, I think there's a little bit more to work with here with Ball State. Buffalo is losing their starting quarterback from last year in Cole Snyder. Caden Samanza was in the system for Ball State last season. And even though there's some solid talent coming back and some solid guys entering through the portal, I just don't see Buffalo being that great this season. And Ball State's going to be able to get a huge road win here. And I think they carry that momentum from MACtion, a long sort of pause here to prepare for this one against the Bowling Green Falcons. Now, look, this is a game that I just sort of have a feeling about, and you get a couple of those games in the MAC every year where, look, it's a home game, and I know it's not a MACtion game, but the team with lesser talent is going to win the game. And now, while I think Bowling Green's talented, Connor Bazelak is back, a ton of really talented wide receiver transfers, some really good pieces on defense. I just think Ball State, again, is going to have a couple games where if everything clicks, such as that defense being as good as it was last year at times, and if that offense can find itself, they're going to be able to win some games this year. I think this game against Bowling Green, just out of the blue, happens to be one of them. Could be that Northern Illinois game they have at home as well, but they will lose that final road game on a Friday to the Ohio Bobcats, even though they are one of the teams with the lowest returning production in college football this year. Still a lot of nice talent, which leads me to a 4-8 record for Ball State this year. Again, not really where you want to see. You want to see this team maybe at 5-7, even in the bowl game at 6-6, which I think is possible, but too much inconsistency. Questions for me: what happens with Kyle Kelly? Where does he go? The defensive line and defense as a whole, I think, takes a step back. And overall, just not in love with Ball State this year. I got him at 4-8, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder. We'll move on to the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs in my next video. Goodbye.